The weapon looked like a child's toy, a spinning cylinder, dropped from a plane, bouncing across water. German intelligence called it absurd. British High Command called it unworkable. But on the night of May the 16th, 1943, it worked. 3 German dams, walls 40 meters thick, built to survive any attack, collapsed in minutes. The Ruhr Valley flooded, German industry stopped, and RAF Bomber Command lost 53 men, proving that sometimes the most ridiculous idea is the one that changes the war. Here's what matters. This wasn't luck. This wasn't brute force. This was British engineering solving a problem everyone said was unsolvable. And the men who flew that night knew most of them wouldn't come back. Let me show you how Britain invented a weapon that defied physics and mounted an operation so precise, so audacious, that 80 years later we're still talking about it. February 1943. Britain had been bombing Germany for 3 years. Thousands of tons of explosives dropped on German cities, factories, railways. The damage was real, but not decisive. German war production kept climbing. The Ruhr Valley, Germany's industrial heartland, was pumping out steel, coal, ammunition, keeping the Wehrmacht supplied, keeping the Luftwaffe flying, keeping Hitler's war machine running. The Ruhr depended on water, massive reservoirs held back by enormous dams. The Möhne Dam, the Eder Dam, the Sorpe Dam. These weren't ordinary structures. They were engineering marvels, some of the largest gravity dams in the world. The Möhne Dam alone held back 140 million cubic meters of water. The wall was 40 meters thick at the base, 130 meters high, built from concrete and stone. Designed to last centuries, British planners had known about the dam since 1937. If you could destroy them, you'd flood the Ruhr Valley, wreck German industry, cripple steel production, drown coal mines, knock out power stations. The impact would be catastrophic. Germany would lose months, possibly years, of industrial output. But there was a problem. Nobody knew how to destroy them. Conventional bombing had failed. RAF Bomber Command had tried high-altitude attacks, dropping standard bombs, aiming for the dam walls. The bombs missed. Even when they hit, they bounced off. The walls were too thick, too strong. You couldn't crack them from above. Torpedoes wouldn't work either. The Germans had stretched anti-torpedo nets across the reservoirs. Any torpedo would tangle in the nets, explode harmlessly in the water. The dams were protected. The Germans knew they were vital. They weren't taking chances, so Britain had a target everyone agreed was critical, and a problem nobody could solve. That's when Barnes Wallis entered the picture. Wallis was 55 years old in 1942. He'd spent his career designing airships and aircraft for Vickers. He'd worked on the R-100 airship, designed the geodetic structure for the Wellington bomber. He was brilliant, obsessive, and convinced he could solve problems other engineers wouldn't touch. When he heard about the dam problem, he started thinking. The issue was energy. To crack a dam that thick, you needed an explosion right against the wall, below the waterline, where the structure was weakest. But how do you get a bomb there? If you drop it from high altitude, it hits the water and sinks in the wrong place. If you fly low and try to skip it across the water, it'll break apart on impact or veer off course. Wallis went back to basics. Physics, geometry, hydrodynamics. He started experimenting with spheres, cylinders, testing them in his garden, skipping them across ponds. His neighbours thought he'd gone mad. A middle-aged engineer throwing wooden balls into water, scribbling calculations on the back of envelopes. But Wallis wasn't mad. He was solving the problem. He worked out that if you gave a cylindrical bomb backspin, dropped it from exactly the right height, at exactly the right speed, it would bounce. Not once, but multiple times. Skip across the water like a stone, and if you got it right, it would hit the dam wall, sink down against the base, and explode at the point of maximum pressure. The water itself would focus the blast, channeling the explosion's force directly into the concrete. The concept was elegant. It was also completely untested. Nobody had ever built a bouncing bomb. Nobody had ever tried to skip high explosive across water. When Wallis presented his idea to the Air Ministry in early 1943, they told him it was impossible, too complicated, too risky. The margins for error were insane. The bomber would have to fly at exactly 60 feet above the water at exactly 240 miles per hour, release the bomb at exactly 425 yards from the target. Any deviation and the bomb would miss or break apart or explode in the wrong place. Wallis kept pushing. He built models, ran tests, refined the calculations. He proved mathematically that it would work. Finally, in February 1943, he got approval. Not enthusiastic approval, grudging, skeptical approval. The Air Ministry gave him 6 weeks to build a working prototype, 6 weeks to invent a weapon that had never existed. Vickers engineers worked round the clock. The bomb itself, codenamed Upkeep, was a cylinder 1.5 meters long, 1.2 meters in diameter, weighing over 4,000 kilograms. Most of that weight was Torpex, a high explosive more powerful than TNT. The bomb had to spin backwards at 500 revolutions per minute before release. That required a hydraulic motor fitted to the Lancaster bomber's bomb bay. The bomb would hang below the aircraft, spinning until the moment of release. Testing began in April. They used a modified Wellington bomber, flew out over the coast, dropped prototypes at Reculver bombing range. Some tests worked, many didn't. Bombs broke apart on impact. Some bounced too high, sailed over the target. Some spun off course. Wallis adjusted the design, changed the casing, recalculated the drop height. By early May, they had a working weapon, barely. Now they needed someone to use it. Wing Commander Guy Gibson was 24 years old. He'd flown over 170 combat missions, bombed Berlin, attacked German battleships, survived 3 tours when most bomber crews didn't survive one. He was blunt, demanding, fearless. When RAF Bomber Command's commander, Arthur Harris, asked him to lead a special operation, Gibson said yes before hearing the details. Harris told him to form a new squadron, hand-picked crews, the best pilots, navigators, bomb aimers, flight engineers, wireless operators, gunners Bomber Command had. They'd train for something that had never been attempted. Gibson asked what the target was. Harris told him he'd find out later. Squadron 617 formed at RAF Scampton in Lincolnshire in March 1943. Gibson selected 21 crews, 147 men in total. Experienced flyers, men who'd completed tours, who knew bombers, who could handle a Lancaster in the dark at low altitude. Some were British, some Canadian, some Australian, some from New Zealand. They were volunteers, every single one. Training started immediately. Low-level flying, formation work, navigation at night over water. The crews didn't know why they were practicing these maneuvers. They weren't told about the dams, weren't told about the bouncing bomb. They flew training runs over British reservoirs, practicing approaches, learning to judge height and speed. It was brutal, dangerous work. Flying a 4-engine bomber 60 feet above water in the dark was asking to die. One crew clipped a tree during practice and crashed, all 7 men killed. Gibson pushed them harder. They flew night after night, sometimes 2 or 3 sorties in a row, until the crews could fly a Lancaster at 60 feet at 240 miles per hour in total darkness and hold that altitude within 5 feet. The margin for error was nothing. Too high and the bomb wouldn't bounce properly. Too low and you'd hit the water. Every pilot in 617 Squadron learned to fly on instinct, trusting instruments, trusting their eyes, trusting their crew. The final piece was aiming. To release the bomb at exactly the right distance from the target, bomb aimer needed a reference point. Wallis came up with a brilliantly simple solution. 2 spotlights, one mounted under the nose of the Lancaster, one under the belly, angled so their beams converged at exactly 60 feet. When the two pools of light merged into one circle on the water, the pilot knew he was at the correct height. For distance, they used a wooden triangle sight. Line up two towers on the dam through the sight's edges, and you're 425 yards out. Release the bomb. Simple, crude, and it worked. By mid-May, 617 Squadron was ready. On May 15th, Gibson finally told his crews what the target was. The Möhne Dam, the Eder Dam, the Sorpe Dam. He showed them reconnaissance photographs, explained the attack plan, described the bomb. Some crews stared in disbelief. A bouncing bomb, flying 60 feet over enemy territory, attacking the most heavily defended dams in Germany? It sounded suicidal. Gibson didn't lie to them. He told them the odds. He told them some wouldn't come back. He told them this was the most important operation Bomber Command had ever mounted. If they succeeded, they'd cripple German war production for months. If they failed, it wouldn't matter. Nobody would even know they'd tried. Every crew volunteered. Not one man refused. They'd trained too hard, come too far. They were 617 Squadron. They'd see it through. May 16th, 1943. The day was warm. Clear skies over Lincolnshire. Crews spent the morning checking their Lancasters, running through pre-flight checks, testing the upkeep bombs. Each aircraft carried one bomb, over 4 tons of explosive hanging in the modified bomb bay, hydraulic motor ready to spin it up to 500 RPM, 19 Lancasters in total, 3 formations, 9 aircraft for the Möhne Dam, 5 for the Eder, 5 for the Sorpe. Gibson held a final briefing at 1800 hours. He went over the route, the timing, the attack procedure. They'd fly low under German radar, across the North Sea, into Holland, across Germany to the Ruhr. Total distance, nearly 400 miles each way. They'd cross the Dutch coast, navigate by landmarks, rivers, railways, lakes. No lights, no radio, strict radio silence until they reached the target. The first wave would hit the Möhne Dam, keep attacking until it broke. Then they'd move to the Eder. The second wave would attack the Sorpe from a different angle. The third wave was a reserve, held back in case the first 2 waves failed. At 2139 hours, Gibson's Lancaster, AJG for George, rolled down the runway at Scampton and lifted off. Behind him, 8 more Lancasters followed at 1-minute intervals. The second wave took off minutes later. The third wave staggered their departure, spacing out to confuse German defences. The flight across the North Sea was uneventful. Low altitude, 100 feet above the waves, navigators checking positions by dead reckoning. They reached the Dutch coast just after midnight. German flak opened up immediately. Tracer fire lit the darkness, shells bursting around the bombers. 1 Lancaster, AJB, was hit crossing the coast. Flak tore through the fuselage, set the starboard wing on fire. The aircraft rolled, hit the water, exploded. 8 men dead in seconds. The remaining aircraft pressed on. They flew over Holland, over German farmland, following rivers, dodging known flak positions. 2 more Lancasters were lost to ground fire. AJK flew into high-tension wires and crashed. AJM was hit by flak near the German border and went down in flames. 15 more men dead. The operation was costing lives before they'd even reached the target. Gibson reached the Möhne Dam at 00:15 hours on May the 17th. The reservoir stretched out before him, black water, the massive dam wall visible in the moonlight. German flak positions opened fire immediately. Tracer rounds, anti-aircraft guns, machine gun fire from towers on either side of the dam. The Germans knew the dam was a target. They were ready. Gibson radioed his formation. He'd make the first run. The other aircraft would circle, wait their turn, follow one by one. He brought AJG down to 60 feet, increased speed to 240 miles per hour, lined up the spotlights. The 2 beams merged into one circle on the water, perfect height. His bomb aimer, Spam Spafford, leaned over the wooden sight, watched the towers align. 425 yards. He pressed the release. The upkeep bomb dropped, spinning backwards at 500 RPM. It hit the water, bounced, once, twice, 3 times. Then it struck the dam wall, sank down, settled against the base. Gibson pulled up hard, cleared the dam by meters. Behind him, the bomb exploded. A massive column of water shot 300 feet into the air. The blast echoed across the valley. Gibson circled back, looked at the dam, still standing. The wall was cracked but intact. Flight Lieutenant Hopgood went next in AJM. He made his run, dropped his bomb under heavy flak fire. Before he could pull up, German gunners hit his Lancaster. The port wing caught fire, the fuel tanks exploded. Hopgood held the aircraft level long enough for some of his crew to bail out. Then AJM smashed into the ground beyond the dam. 4 men died in the crash. 3 survived, badly injured, taken prisoner. Flight Lieutenant Martin attacked third. His bomb bounced perfectly, hit the dam, exploded. Another enormous blast, more cracks spreading across the wall. Still holding. Squadron leader Young followed. Perfect drop, perfect bounce. The bomb detonated against the dam. More damage, the cracks deepening, still holding. Flight Lieutenant Maltby attacked fifth. His bomb bounced, struck the wall dead center, sank, exploded. This time the wall moved. Water began pouring through a breach near the top. The cracks spread, chunks of concrete broke away, and suddenly the entire center section of the Möhne Dam collapsed. 140 million cubic meters of water roared through the breach. A wave 10 meters high surged down the valley, smashing through villages, sweeping away factories, drowning coal mines, tearing out bridges, railway lines, roads. The torrent reached the Ruhr River, turned it into a raging flood, swamped power stations, drowned farmland. German industry in the Ruhr Valley stopped. Gibson radioed back to Scampton. One word. Goner, code for target destroyed. He led the remaining aircraft to the Eder Dam, 50 miles south. No flak positions here. The Germans hadn't expected anyone would find it, let alone attack it. But the approach was nightmare. The dam sat in a narrow valley, surrounded by hills. Pilots had to dive into the valley, level out over the reservoir, make their run, then pull up sharply to clear the hills on the far side. In daylight, it would have been difficult. In darkness, it was nearly impossible. Flight Lieutenant Shannon made the first run. He aborted, couldn't get the altitude right, pulled up, circled back. Second run, same problem. Third run, he lined it up, dropped his bomb. It bounced, hit the dam, exploded. Damage, but the wall held. Flight Lieutenant Maudslay attacked next. His bomb, released late, bounced over the dam wall, exploded on the far side. The blast caught Maudslay's Lancaster as it climbed out. The aircraft staggered, limped away, trailing smoke. It crashed minutes later. All 8 men killed. Flight Lieutenant Knight made the final attack on the Eder. Perfect run, perfect drop. The bomb bounced, hit the dam, sank, detonated. The Eder Dam wall cracked, sagged, then broke. Another 200 million cubic meters of water thundered into the valley below. 2 dams destroyed. Gibson sent the code word nigger, named after his dog that had been killed by a car the day before. The operations room at Scampton erupted. Barnes Wallis, standing in the corner listening to the radio transmissions, started crying. The third target, the Sorpe Dam, was different. An earth dam, not concrete. The bouncing bomb wouldn't work against it. The attack required a different approach, flying along the length of the dam, dropping the bomb to explode inside the dam structure. 5 aircraft were assigned. Only 2 reached the target. They attacked, dropped their bombs, caused damage. The Sorpe held. Of the 19 Lancasters that took off from Scampton, only 11 returned. 8 aircraft lost, 53 men dead. 3 more taken prisoner, badly injured. For Bomber Command, where losses of 5% were considered acceptable, this was devastating, a 42% casualty rate. Nearly half the squadron gone in one night. But the dams were broken. The Ruhr Valley was flooded. German industry was crippled. Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, inspected the damage 2 days later. He reported that German war production in the Ruhr had dropped by 60%. Coal mines were flooded, would take months to pump out. Steelworks had no water for cooling. Power stations were offline. Railways were washed away. Factories sat idle. The immediate industrial impact was catastrophic. The Germans threw everything into repairs. Thousands of workers, soldiers, prisoners of war, forced labourers. They worked day and night, rebuilding the dams, pumping out mines, restoring railways. It took 5 months to repair the Möhne Dam. The Eder took longer. The Germans diverted resources from other projects, pulled workers from Atlantic Wall construction, delayed production of tanks and aircraft, all because 2 dams had broken. Churchill addressed Parliament. He called it a feat of arms worthy of the highest honour. King George VI visited RAF Scampton, met the surviving crews, shook hands with Gibson. 617 Squadron received 33 decorations. Guy Gibson was awarded the Victoria Cross. Barnes Wallis received nothing officially. He didn't care. His bomb had worked. But here's what the operation really proved. German engineering built those dams to be indestructible. German intelligence said a bouncing bomb was impossible. German defences were supposed to make the attack suicidal. Britain ignored all of that, invented a weapon that broke the rules, trained crews to fly what everyone said couldn't be flown, and executed an operation so precise that 80 years later it's still studied in military academies worldwide. The Germans feared British commandos because they struck without warning. They feared the RAF because bombers kept coming no matter how many you shot down. But the Dambusters raid was something else. It was British ingenuity at its finest, taking an impossible problem, solving it with physics and engineering, then betting men's lives that the solution would work. And it did. 53 men died proving it. Every single one of them knew the odds. Everyone volunteered anyway. That's the other thing about Britain in 1943. When the job needed doing, men stepped forward. Not because they were reckless, not because they didn't understand the danger, because they knew what was at stake. Germany had conquered Europe. Britain stood alone. If German industry kept running, kept producing tanks, planes, submarines, the war would drag on for years. More cities bombed, more soldiers killed, more civilians dead. The dams were a chance to hit Germany where it hurt, to prove that Britain could still strike back, still damage the Nazi war machine. The operation didn't win the war, but it changed something. After the Dambusters raid, German planners knew that nowhere was safe. Not even targets they thought were untouchable. If the British could destroy the Ruhr dams, what else could they do? Germany had to divert resources to defending everything, spreading forces thin, weakening other areas. That mattered, and it sent a message to the rest of the world. Britain wasn't finished. Britain was still dangerous. British engineers could invent weapons nobody else imagined. British aircrews could fly missions nobody else would attempt. British determination, British ingenuity, British bloody-mindedness, whatever you want to call it, was still a force Germany couldn't match. Barnes Wallis went on to design other weapons. The Tallboy bomb, the Grand Slam bomb, massive deep penetration weapons that destroyed German submarine pens, railway viaducts, V-2 rocket sites. He never stopped inventing. Guy Gibson flew one more tour, then was killed in September 1944 when his Mosquito crashed returning from a raid over Germany. He was 26 years old. 617 Squadron continued operations throughout the war. They flew some of the most dangerous missions Bomber Command mounted. Precision attacks on targets other squadrons wouldn't touch. By the end of the war, they'd lost over 200 men, but they destroyed their targets, every single one. The Dambusters raid proved something about Britain that Germany never understood. It wasn't the size of the military or the number of tanks or the strength of the navy. It was the willingness to try the impossible. To look at a problem everyone said couldn't be solved and solve it anyway. To build a weapon that broke physics, train men to fly what couldn't be flown, and execute an operation that shouldn't have worked. And when the bomb bounced across the water on the night of May the 16th, 1943, when it struck the Möhne Dam wall and exploded, when 140 million tons of water roared through the breach, that was Britain telling Germany that the war wasn't over. Not by a long way. The Germans called it a terror weapon. Churchill called it a triumph. Barnes Wallis called it physics. The men of 617 Squadron called it a job that needed doing. History calls it one of the most audacious operations of the Second World War, and 80 years later, we're still talking about it. Because sometimes the most ridiculous idea is the one that changes everything. And sometimes British ingenuity is the weapon nobody sees coming.